The metal of the burner phone was ice cold against my palm. But when I turned it on, the screen didn't show a menu. It showed a photo of my own front door, taken through a long-distance lens just 10 minutes ago. My heart hit my ribs like a trapped bird. My husband, Michael, thinks he's tracking my car via GPS. But he's already 3 steps ahead of that. In exactly 40 minutes, the bank doors will lock. And by tomorrow morning, my children will be on a flight to a country that doesn't recognize international kidnapping laws. I thought James was helping me hide. But James is the one who took the photo. He's been in my house. He knows about the secret money. I can't call the police, because the man standing in my kitchen right now has already filed a restraining order that says I'm the one who's dangerous. I have no lawyer, no assets, and the only person I trusted is currently watching me through that window. Let me take you back to the moment I realized the person in my bed was a stranger. The tires of Sarah's Volvo crunched over the pristine white gravel of the Greenwich law firm's driveway, a sound like breaking bone. She killed the engine, but stayed seated, her hands still gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The humidity of the Connecticut summer pressed against the windshield, a thick, invisible wall of heat that made the air shimmer over the manicured hydrangeas. Sarah looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes, sharp and restless, scanned her own face as if looking for a decimal point out of place. She began to count the syllables of the sign hanging over the entrance. Reed and Associates. 5. A prime number. Incomplete. She reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a heavy, nondescript envelope. Inside was $60,000 in cash. Her entire secret savings, skimmed over 7 years from the household accounts, 3 cents here, a rounded-up utility bill there. It was the physical manifestation of her survival instinct. To anyone else, it was a pile of paper. To Sarah, it was the collateral required to buy back her life. She straightened the hem of her blazer, ensuring the line was perfectly parallel to the hem of her skirt, and stepped out into the stifling heat. The lobby of Evelyn Reed's office was a vacuum of personality, all white marble and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the Sound. The HVAC system emitted a low-frequency thrum that Sarah felt in the arches of her feet, a vibration that signaled the presence of power. Evelyn Reed was waiting. The attorney was a woman of sharp angles and severe black hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch the skin of her forehead. On her desk sat a small silver bell. "The retainer is here," Sarah said, her voice metered and staccato. She placed the envelope on the marble surface. 60,000. I want the filing initiated by end of business. Michael is already moving assets. The margin of error for a clean break is closing. Evelyn didn't look at the money. She looked at Sarah, her eyes like polished obsidian. She reached out and rang the silver bell, a sharp, piercing ding that echoed through the sterile room. Precision is what I'm paid for, Sarah. Your husband is a predator, but he's a predator who follows a rhythm. We just have to change the beat. Sarah nodded, her fingers tapping a 1-2-3-1-2-3 rhythm against her thigh. I have the ledger of his inconsistencies, the offshore transfers, the 12-second calls to unlisted numbers. I need him dismantled, Evelyn. I want the math of his life to equal 0. As Sarah exited the building, the sun felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. She was halfway to her car when her phone buzzed in her pocket. The caller ID showed James Wilson, Michael's business partner and the only man Michael seemed to trust. Sarah hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. James was a man of shadows, always looking for the nearest exit. A man who seemed to carry the weight of the world in the slouch of his shoulders. Sarah, don't go home. James's voice was a ragged whisper, the sound of sandpaper on wood. I'm at the park, the one with the rusty swing set. You need to get here now. Michael knows about the lawyer. He's planning to take the kids. He's going to vanish Sarah. He's going to erase them. The air in Sarah's lungs turned to lead. That's a 100% probability of total loss, she whispered, her logic failing her as the image of her children's empty beds flashed through her mind. She didn't wait for him to respond. She threw the car into gear, the tires screaming against the asphalt as she sped toward the local park. The park was a vast, lonely expanse of green, forgotten by the town. The wind carried the high-pitched, metal-on-metal groan of a swing set, a sound that vibrated in Sarah's teeth as she ran toward the stone bridge. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. James had told her there was a burner phone taped beneath a specific bench, a lifeline he'd promised to provide if things turned binary. She reached the bench, her fingers fumbling blindly beneath the rough wood. Cold plastic bit into her palm. She ripped the device free, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The scent of rotting kelp from the nearby water was thick enough to taste. Just as her fingers closed around the phone, a low growl of an engine cut through the rhythmic creak of the swings. A black SUV, windows tinted to a funereal black, jumped to the curb and roared across the grass. The tires tore deep gashes into the turf. Sarah froze, the burner phone clutched to her chest. The door swung open before the vehicle even stopped, and a man in a dark hoodie and a surgical mask lunged at her. "Give it here," the man hissed. He didn't reach for the phone. He reached for her purse, the bag that still held the signed retainer agreement and the remaining records of Michael's theft. Sarah didn't think. She reacted. She swung her heavy designer bag with the force of a woman who had spent decades calculating the exact weight of her anger. The metallic buckle caught the attacker in the temple with a sickening thud. He grunted, stumbling back, but lunged again, his fingers digging into her arm. Sarah kicked out, her heel catching his shin, the vibration of the impact traveling up her leg. "Get away from me," she screamed. The attacker glanced back at the idling SUV, then at the blood beginning to seep from his forehead. He cursed, scrambled back into the passenger seat, and the vehicle tore away, leaving a cloud of acrid blue smoke and charred rubber in its wake. Sarah collapsed onto the bench, her knees shaking. She was a woman of numbers, of logic, of cold forensic audits. Physical violence was a variable she hadn't accounted for. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. She pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, the blue light casting a sickly glow over her pale features. She expected a blank screen, a factory setting, perhaps a preloaded contact list. Instead, her breath hitched. The wallpaper was a high-resolution photo of her own front door. It wasn't a stock image. It was taken from the vantage point of a car parked across the street. A wet footprint was visible on the porch in the photo, a footprint she recognized from that morning. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. James Wilson hadn't just given her a phone. He had given her proof that he was watching her house. He wasn't just an ally. He was the eye in the dark. The man she thought was her protector was the one documenting her every move. She drove home in a state of clinical shock, her mind frantically trying to recalculate the odds of survival. The town of Greenwich passed by in a blur of neon green lawns and white picket fences. A manicured masterpiece that now felt like a gilded cage. When she pulled into her driveway, she saw Michael's Mercedes. He was leaning against the front door, his impeccably groomed hair catching the late afternoon sun. Beside him stood a woman in a cheap suit, holding a stack of papers. "Sarah," Michael said. his voice flowing and melodic. The inclusionary hook he used to reel in investors. "We've been waiting. I was worried. You haven't been yourself lately, and we really need to settle the energy in this family." The woman stepped forward, her eyes wide and anxious. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm Jennifer. I'm a process server. I'm so sorry to bother you. Have a blessed day." She thrust the papers into Sarah's hand, as if they were burning. Sarah looked down. It was a restraining order, an emergency petition for full custody. The words "mentally unstable," "erratic behavior," and "paranoid delusions" leaped off the page. "I've already had the locks changed, Sarah," Michael said, his smile never reaching his predatory eyes. He leaned in, his hand brushing her forearm in a gesture of feigned comfort. "We agreed you'd work on the finger-tapping thing. It's making people think you're losing your grip on the reality we've built. For the sake of the children, I had to act. We're better than this conflict, don't you think?" Sarah looked past him into the house. Through the fisheye peephole of the door, she felt the house itself judging her. "Where are they?" she asked, her voice a hollow rasp. "Safe," Michael murmured. "With someone who isn't spending their morning in the weeds of a public park fighting imaginary attackers." Sarah pushed past him, her shoulder hitting his chest. He didn't move, a solid wall of charcoal wool and arrogance. She forced her way into the foyer, her eyes darting to the mahogany side table where she kept her jewelry box, a collection of heirlooms that represented her only liquid collateral. The box was open. The velvet lining was bare. The diamond studs her mother had left her, the gold watch she'd bought herself after her first major audit, the emerald necklace Michael had given her as a bonus for her silence. All gone. "The accounts are frozen too," Michael said from the doorway, his voice dropping to that soft, intimate register that forced her to listen. "I had to protect our assets from your recent spending spree. You're overcomplicating the narrative, Sarah. Just take a breath. One breath for me." Sarah turned to him, her fingers counting the syllables of his sentence. 14. Symmetrical. A lie. "You're liquidating," she said, her voice regaining its edge. "You're stripping the bone. You think if you leave me with nothing, I'll stop being the auditor. But you forgot one thing, Michael. I don't need a bank account to see the debt you owe." She stormed out of the house, ignoring his calls. She needed Evelyn. She needed the law. She climbed back into her car, her mind a whirlwind of data points. She tried to call Evelyn's office, but the line emitted a rhythmic, three-tone shriek, the sound of a disconnected number. She pulled over and tried to access the firm's website on her phone. 404 not found. The digital footprint of her only ally had been erased in the span of an hour. The heat in the car was suffocating, a stagnant 95 degrees that made her clothes feel like a second damp skin. She began to drive toward the coast, toward her mother's house in Rhode Island, the only place left that wasn't bugged or mortgaged. The coastal road was a hostile stretch of jagged cliffs and crashing gray waves. The smell of rotting kelp and salt thickened in her throat. A silver sedan appeared in her rearview mirror. It didn't pass. It stayed exactly 3 car lengths behind her, matching her speed as she navigated the sharp turns where the guardrails were missing. The sedan accelerated. Sarah saw the flash of sunlight on the chrome grille before the first impact. Thump. Her head snapped back against the rest. The Volvo fishtailed, the tires screaming as they caught the edge of the crumbling asphalt. "You want to play physics?" Sarah hissed, her knuckles turning white on the wheel. She watched the sedan in the mirror. It was pulling out to ram her again, aiming for the rear quarter panel to send her spinning into the churning foam 300 feet below. She waited. She counted the seconds of the sedan's acceleration. 1, 2, 3. Just as the silver nose of the pursuer lunged for her bumper, Sarah slammed on her high-performance brakes. The Volvo's nose dipped, the tires biting into the road with a mechanical growl. The sedan, caught by its own momentum, had no time to react. It swerved to avoid the collision, the driver overcorrecting. Sarah watched through her side window as the silver car went into a violent, smoking spin, its tires shrieking in protest as it slid sideways across the road, narrowly missing the drop-off before coming to a halt in a cloud of dust and burnt rubber. Sarah didn't stop. She floored the accelerator, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her ears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the burner phone James had given her. She needed to know. She needed to see the metadata. She pulled into a gas station, the fluorescent lights flickering with a disorienting strobe effect. She accessed the phone's hidden files, her fingers flying across the screen. She found the logs for the surveillance photos. She found the payment history for the device. Her world tilted. The masked man in the park, the one who had tried to take her bag, was listed in the phone's contacts as PI1. But the payment for the PI's services hadn't come from Michael. The digital trail, the breadcrumbs of data that only a forensic accountant could trace, led back to a private ledger. James Wilson. James hadn't been warning her about the attack. He had been coordinating it. He had sent her to the park specifically so his hired hand could steal her evidence. Every word of help, every warning about Michael, had been a calculated move to keep her in a state of panic, making her easier to herd. She was the prey, and the two men she thought were at war were actually hunting in tandem. The realization was a gut punch that left her gasping in the humid air of the gas station parking lot. She looked at the burner phone as if it were a venomous snake. It was still recording. It had been recording her entire time in the car. "I see you, James," she whispered into the microphone, her voice cold and hard as a diamond. "I see the variance in your story, and I'm going to balance the books." She drove back toward the city, not to her home, but to the high-rise office of Evelyn Reed. She didn't care if the website was down. She knew where the bricks and mortar were. The building stood like a sterile monolith against the darkening sky. The service elevator smelled of industrial bleach and something sweet, the cloying scent of decay hidden behind chemicals. She reached Evelyn's floor. The reception area was dark, the only light coming from the moon reflecting off the sound. As she stepped inside, a heavy metallic clack echoed through the suite. The electronic locks on the glass doors had engaged. She was trapped in a soundproof vacuum. "Evelyn?" Sarah called out. Her voice didn't echo. It was swallowed by the acoustic tiling. She moved toward the conference room. A single lamp was lit, casting a yellow glow over a folder sitting in the center of the mahogany table. It was labeled The Johnson Strategy. Sarah lunged for it. This was it, the legal blueprint. She opened the folder and began using the burner phone to photograph the pages. Her eyes scanned the text. Affidavits from neighbors she'd never spoken to, forged medical reports claiming she had a history of chemical imbalance, a detailed map of her hidden offshore accounts. "It's a beautiful piece of fiction, isn't it?" Michael stepped out from the shadows of the corner office. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, and he was stirring a glass of scotch with his pinky finger. 12 times. Clockwise. "You're trespassing, Sarah," Michael said, his voice a predatory purr. "And the security cameras just caught you stealing confidential legal files. That's a felony. On top of the mental health hold, I don't think you'll be seeing the children for a very long time. Sarah held the burner phone up. I have the proof, Michael. I have the photos of your fraud. I have the recording of James admitting he's working for you. Michael laughed, a hollow, metallic sound. James? James is a broken man who rewrites grocery lists to feel alive. He didn't do this for me. He did it for the same reason everyone does: self-preservation. Suddenly, the burner phone in Sarah's hand chimed. It automatically synced to the office's Bluetooth speakers. A low-frequency hum filled the room, and then a sound that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. It was the sound of laughter. Intimate, breathless laughter.